We didn't talk about who would host this meeting, but
Should you start the recording already?
yeah.
Okay, cool. Would you like to host, Nikki?
I can lead the discussion, no problem. Who would like to take notes?
I can take notes.
Okay. Thank you. I think we wanted to go over some of the milestones and do a bit of a retrospective, but more focus on the milestones for the Green Reviews Working Group project. We wanted to align and make sure we are all on the same page, and since we are blocked in some ways, but we have a lot of things planned, it would be great to just touch base. One thing that we can start, like we have somewhat of a roadmap here. We can also talk, yep, let me send you a link. We can go over a roadmap. We can also talk about the immediate next steps and what we think is the most important. Antonio, did you want to add something, since, or Leo, or anyone, if you'd like to, yeah, since it was your idea also, I'd like to make sure we're doing what you had in mind.
Yes, so I think in general so I think the working group is doing very well. I mean, there's like a lot of progress and so on. But I think there's like still room to improve in terms of doing multiple things at once. So for example, I think some aspects of the work that we want to do are kind of blocked. So focusing more on, okay, how can we get like metrics now, or like as soon as possible. So like the core delivery kind of the project, and then we can always like refine and improve like the infrastructure and all those things a little bit later. But kind of having like a end-to-end version, it does not need to be like very nice. Can be like manually stitched together, whatever, but focusing a little bit more on the minimal product, and then thinking about, okay, what are then the next steps that we need to take to actually bring this to like a viable product in some way, and also enabling people, I don't know, the Fargo team or whatever, to give feedback on like a running system, even if it's not working crazy well because maybe it's manually deployed or something, but having something to discuss on, I think would help, and may also enable other contributors to work on different parts of the project. Right now, a lot of work, I think, is done on the GitOps part. And also, I mean, we have like some roadblocks here and there. So I think like the progress in general is all great. But right, I think maybe there's like a possibility to be a little bit more slim. Yeah.
Russ?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a really good point there on how we can work more in parallel. And even in terms of kind of next steps, I think we're a bit blocked at the moment on the S3 bucket, which we're kind of working through. But like we have the access token, which is great. So I think we're unblocked on the Flux side. So we could even do something like set up Flux with the current manual cluster, and then we could start working on that part of the GitOps part, and then we can keep working on the S3 stuff in parallel. But maybe there's some parts where we can, we can break things up, and also to break things up into smaller tasks. So for example, we could have one task is bootstrapping Flux, and then another task is like setting up Prometheus once there is a Flux. And maybe in that way we can work a bit more in parallel and get more people contributing.
And also I think one part which would be very nice is if we have like overarching or like bigger like packages that we did. Basically we have like this kind of a big project, right? We need to talk with Falco. We at some point we need to onboard all the other CNCF projects and so on. I think there's like a lot of stuff to do. Right now everything is kind of one. We have like one project. Maybe it makes sense to break it down a little bit. So we have GitOps. GitOps is one part. Maybe the configuration of CNCF projects. So what are actually the manifests, or what configuration do we require from other projects? I think this would be like very interesting for CNCF projects. So the Falco team, what is like the configuration they need to provide us? So splitting up kind of our work into those packages. And then after that, we can also maybe have like people kind of more focusing on one part and not about focusing on everything.
Yeah, with regards to the state of the collaboration with Falco, just to update everyone, that this comment asks if there's been progress from the Falco team to create the repo that will contain all of the Falco deployments that we will use in our GitOps pipeline. However, I think Antonio wanted to raise that maybe we could have the manual cluster and work with them that way as well for the development process. Like we have our end goal is to use GitOps and automation, but to get their Falco deployed in a cluster on our infra faster, we can share kubeconfig with them. Antonio, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, in general, I think there have been a lot of discussion, and like I at least that was my feeling, that I felt like it was hard to focus on many different things. And then I thought, for the goal that we have to have some metrics from Falco, the sooner maybe we could go some dirty way. So like quick and dirty. So like even setting up so like right now we don't have a cluster, but it could be okay for the first time to set a cluster manually and share the kubeconfig with Falco. And then so in this way they are able to they're able to deploy Falco on the cluster, and then we could also deploy a first version of the metric provider and get some metric without having to set all the engineering part of automating the pipeline and so on. So having some numbers and get to get things rolling in a way.
Russ?
Yes, I think we have the manual cluster we created before. I think that's still running. I think we have a bit of an issue about how we can share the kubeconfig with the Falco team, like in a kind of nice way. One thing I was wondering, in the service desk docs, they recommend for sharing credentials using either Keybase or like 1Password have free open source accounts. So maybe we could get like a 1Password account, which we could then use to give, we could give them access to. They can get the kubeconfig, and then they can use the manual cluster.
Yeah, for me, like whatever enables the Falco team like to have access to a cluster where they can install it, and then like we already have Falco installed, and then we can focus, I don't know, on the testing phase, or like load, like to generate a synthetic load which is meaningful, and then like we can also like I would say like these are the top 3 priority: get some metric provider, get Falco deployed, and get some metrics out, and all the other discussion we can leave it out of focus for the moment, because yeah, they're about having a nice process, but maybe it would be nice to also have numbers so that we can enable more people to work.
Can't we not just like deploy Falco ourselves? So if we can, I mean, I think the goal should not be that every CNCF project has access to the infrastructure and then deploys their project. It should be they provide at some point like a configuration or whatever, and then our system deploys it. So there's like not the requirement that we share credentials with everyone. And probably it's also easier if we deploy Falco ourselves, because then we don't need to engage the Falco team anymore. We can just maybe record some of the measurements, send them over.
Yeah, like that's also a super valid option. I think the drawback of us developing Falco is that if then we make some mistake, or like we are not able to deploy it, or like we face some difficulties, we need to jump back and forth, and then like I don't know, we think we had done the right setting of installation, but then we're missing something. I mean, if they instead like install it, we are sure that they install the right version, what they want to test, and all the settings are done right. It's all like this is like, but of course we could also try to install it once and see how it goes and give some report to them.
Maybe one more comment very shortly. I think in this call it would make sense if we can step like a level higher and not talk about the details, and talk about, okay, maybe this could be like one thing we can focus on, and then maybe we can choose the way, okay, we deploy Falco, or maybe we enable the Falco team to deploy it. But we don't need to decide this like in this meeting, because it's like more about like the roadmap and the goals. So, William? William, you have your hand up. Would you like to add something? Maybe you're muted.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was muted twice. I was trying to say that I think that sharing credentials, like you said, Leo, is maybe is not the best approach. And what we could end up having as well, when we have a configuration that is optimal for these tests delivered by the project, is that, well, theoretically we shouldn't be in the position of making the mistake, because it's delivered by the project. And it will help us also learning as we move on from project to project, what we need, what we really need, what we really don't need, and what we need to improve for the, as in items that we ask to the next project. So, but I am absolutely with Antonio on the fact that we should get started with a minimum viable product, and then improve on our GitOps, improve on our practice. But we should definitely get started with an MVP. That was all.
Leo?
So, right. I think, right, for the MVP, I don't think we need to define, okay, what are all the information that the Falco team or any CNCF project in the future needs to provide us to deploy their project, so we can measure it and so on. I think for the MVP, we can just omit all of this, and we can deploy Falco. Maybe at the end, we will have like a different strategy, deployment strategy or whatever. But I think to reach like the state that we have some data, some measurements, I think we don't need to know this already upfront. But it's like definitely very important to explore like what is like the interface between those two parties.
Yes. Well, when I say MVP, Leo, I'm referring to our environment, right? To the cluster, to the GitOps, and everything that Ross is working on. I'm saying, let's go. Even if it's manually built and dirty, let's get moving. Meanwhile, with an MVP, that's the cluster and how it works and how it's deployed, how it's tainted with the workers, and we move on so we can measure projects. That's what I call MVP.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Rose.
Yes, yeah, I think for the MVP, sort of thinking kind of what's kind of the smallest step we could take. If we use the manual cluster and did like a default install of Falco and measured the idle load, then that would start. It would be kind of a start. We start having some metrics that we can start looking at, because we know we've got some complexity around, creating synthetic load, and I think we want to measure the idle load anyway. But I think we could start doing that, with the current manual cluster, and then in parallel we can work on the automation. And once the automation is ready and we kind of run blocked, then we can kind of cut over from the manual cluster to the like full GitOps cluster. But we can still just get going now with the manual cluster.
So we have this issue for manually deploying components, and there is a note that we can deploy Falco either by the working group contributors in this dev environment initially. So we do have this already captured, but we do aim to have the CNCF project maintainers maintain the manifest needed to deploy each project, such as Falco, in the long run. Is this a good summary of the discussion that we're having? Like this, I don't think there's something new there. Correct me if I'm wrong. In
Yes,
the
that'd
issue, however,
Sorry, Nikki, I would say as well, I don't think, that's new. I think we've maybe discussed that before, but it was probably a while back. So I think it's good to go over it again. But I think we could, start with that. I think, longer term, we probably want to have, the Falco maintainers, providing the manifests. And once we have the GitOps, we can do that kind of vibe pull request flow. But for now, I think we can experiment with what we have, which I think we've discussed before. It's just been probably a few weeks since we had those discussions.
Yeah, and to add to this, I think looking at the issue I just shared, the first points were about using cluster API, which we moved away from to use OpenTofu instead. So I just edited the issue. But please feel free to make any comments. Let's focus on this issue for the manual deployment and testing. Leo?
Right. I think like this issue would, in like my head would definitely be like, okay, road to MVP. What are like the required issues we need to tackle to have the MVP running? Would be definitely like this manually deployment and issue to be resolved and all these check marks to be set. The GitOps stuff is like, for me, like an enhancement to this, which is like required to have like a viable product, like a first release or something. But to have like a minimal product, I think we don't need to have like a GitOps setup running and everything. Which, so I would focus on the manual deployment, and then kind of this is just like one of the issues to get the MVP. Right. Next one would be probably to deploy Falco and maybe to store the metrics somewhere, things like this.
Yeah, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see if there are any hands up. So if there are any hands up, please go ahead. Otherwise, I wanted to share this in our roadmap. We have separated having the manual workflow versus everything with automation. So the automation we moved to after KubeCon EU. And our goal until March is to have the manual test. So just I wanted to reiterate that this is also reflected in the roadmap.
Yeah, is this something, I think this makes sense, but is this like something we already discussed in one of the meetings and we agreed on? So for me, this looks, I think, like a good strategy, but maybe Ross or somebody, William, have some ideas about this.
I do remember we discussed splitting the manual and the automated parts of the pipeline, so it's also here and here, but definitely needs improvements, and I think it's good to reiterate and good to touch base because maybe not everyone was in those meetings, etc.
I have Nikki, I have one thing. I think the roadmap looks good timeline wise. I'm just wondering that since we have the cluster already built, we could focus already on getting the manifest from Falco, and we can focus on the manifest from Falco. So what is stopping us from having a parallel stream working on the automation already?
Yeah, nothing. I think that's what we're trying to do. Like we are trying to get all the GitOps and automation work done, and at the same time, we have valid concerns on like having something working as soon as possible so that we can unblock other parts, and that can be, as Antonio was saying, like a hacky short-term solution. So I think both, yeah, definitely. I think it's just it's not in the roadmap, it's captured as like we prioritize the manual work. But if this is taking long and we're blocked, then we try to use a hack. And I think that's where we're at right now because we're blocked on a couple fronts. We're blocked with the S3 bucket and we're blocked with Falcon maintainers creating a repo that has the manifests. I hope that, yeah. What do you think?
Well, what I'm thinking is, I'm trying to think if there are things that we can do to remove those blocks on our own side. Meaning, do we need the repo from the Falcon maintainer? Can we have our own repo and ask the Falcon maintainers for content? Period. On the other side, do we need the S3 bucket, or can we hack our way around it until we get things sorted from the S3 front? I understand that we want an S3 bucket that is funded and all of this, but within the Equinix environment, is there anything that we can use, since I suppose we have some credits that we are consuming, or we are just being given a number of servers? I'm not fully aware of how is our setup. So and that's absolutely my fault, of course.
I can,
Russ?
yeah, thanks. I can go over kind of where we are with the S3 bucket. And yeah, it is quite frustrating because it's a very small amount of state that we need. The current state is like 10 kilobytes or something. It's a tiny file, but just having the state outside of the cluster just makes it easy to do the provisioning. Maybe we can find a workaround there. The other thing that might help as well was potentially we could use Flux with the manual cluster. And because I think when we talked with Melissa, something that was quite keen from her side was to know what was actually deployed so they can kind of see the state of the cluster. So if we had Flux against the manual cluster, they would have that, they could see what we're running and we could create it in our repo rather than waiting on theirs. And I think we have everything we need for Flux at the moment because we got the access token that we need on the GitHub side.
Okay. So I'm just throwing it out there in the interest of making a little bit more I don't want to say agile, but that's the actual term that I want to use. More flexible, let's say, the work. Would it make sense if Ross, yourself, myself, and whoever is technically involved into building this, we meet offline and we try to find some workarounds that we bring back to the rest of the group? Or because I did what Antonio said, I feel it's absolutely correct. There is a lot of noise in the Slack channel, and we might lose focus on what are the priorities for the roadmap and what needs to be done sooner than later. So just wondering if that's something that we should be evaluating.
Yes, I can say just quickly, and then I'll kind of hand over. But well, we have the meeting next week, which we could sort of discuss then, or an ad hoc meeting before then would also work. Maybe also Dipanka could also join as well, because he's been looking at working on the automation with me as well, and we can see just how we can unblock that part and maybe split up the work as well. But I think yes, having a meeting for that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Ross, myself, Dipanka, and whoever is involved in the technical setup, I think it's just ideal to meet up and create 2 streams, one for the manual cluster and one for the automation, and tackle whatever are the roadblocks.
Thank you. Yeah. Wanted to make one call out that some of the Falco maintainers, the reason why we haven't created the repo in our org is there are constraints around which repos they are able to contribute to. So that might not be immediately obvious. That's why we're waiting for them to create a repo under their org. Yeah, I wanted to share that little detail, but that doesn't stop us from having Flux watching dev deployment of Falco in our own repo. So definitely we can have our dev stream and Falco deployed by us in our repo, like through a repo.
Cool.
Antonio?
Yeah, there is one question for William, because like you said, you wanted to stop 2 multiple streams, one for automation and one for the manual stuff. I see the idea around it. It's great, like to have some parallel work and have some progress in both sides. But I think like we have enough work to do on the manual steps, so that like I think parallel, like people can work parallel. Like for example, I don't know, but if one person takes care of installing manually Falco, one person takes care of installing Kepler manually, and another person takes care about installing Prometheus locally, and then another person takes care about doing the K6 stuff. This is already a lot of stuff we can parallelize for the most important, or at least for me, the most priority thing, which is the manual part, because I see no value in working in parallel for something which is for Q2, not Q2, but like H2. So I would think, rather than setting up parallel streams for doing automated and manual, why don't we set parallel streams only for manual? You know what I mean? And try to understand like what are the blockers and take all the decisions that we need to have the manual process as soon as possible. And then like ideally, once we're done with that, we can set parallel streams for the automated part.
That works, Antonio. Absolutely. If there is, as you say, so much work to do on the manual cluster, then it does make sense to dedicate to let's say parallelize the streams on one cluster. The only thing is that there is someone, Deepak, if I understand, is already working on the automation. So I would leave him working on that, and maybe Ross and myself and somebody else can work on the parallel streams for the manual cluster. The reason why I'm saying this is because it's just simply specializations and interest of the folks that are working on things. So we should not forget that maybe some of us volunteer on things that they can do and they feel can do. So, but absolutely, yes. Let's work on the manual. Also, the things that we learn on the manual setup, we are going to bring them to the automated setup. So
yeah, exactly. And this is also a very important point, because in the end, we can't automate what we don't know how to do, right?
correct.
Or like
Yeah.
we have a brief idea, but I think also Leo has a point. Maybe we can try to help here and try to set these streams of work for both the manual and automated part. And then I don't know if we can, if like from my perspective, if we can push for more focus on the manual part, this would be ideal. But then, of course, if folks are willing to work on something else, that's nothing. I mean, we cannot force people to work on something they don't like. Anyway.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think, like, to what you also mentioned for kind of who has which interest and specialization, and also to what Leo provided in the comments, like with the drawing, I think it could be nice, really nice and helpful to like maybe make it easier for the beginners or those who would like to step in to pick up tasks if it's possible to like to make it more visible, like splitting in dedicated sub issues, even with every task that is needed. Like you mentioned, Antonio, that we have a lot of tasks for the manual setup. Can we make these tasks even more visible, fully split them in some kind of sub issues that can be picked up by multiple people? Because maybe some people may also be a bit afraid of stepping in if, for example, like you mentioned, Dipankar was working on automation himself. Maybe there are more people who would like to pitch in if we can make it split it up in more issues, and then it maybe will make it easier for others also to choose smaller tasks to begin with that maybe will help them learn something new or do something that they know they can do, and then it's less scary to start. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think this is a very important point, and maybe we should make more effort into the noise, I would say, because I think also William picked up the right word. Like there is a bit of noise, and yeah, I think we can make some effort in trying to let things that need more prioritization like clear to everybody, and yeah, that would and break big task in subtasks that any entry level can be leveraged. That's a very good point. So it's definitely something we can do.
From what I understand, the next thing to do for this setup is to set a meeting, let's say an ad hoc meeting with Ross, myself, and I guess also the banker, and I'm not sure who else.
Yeah, I can join also. Happy to join.
Yeah, same for me.
So I would just recommend that we have it exactly the same as this meeting. So it's just like on the calendar and people can join and
Okay. But with a technical focus, of course.
yeah, yes.
Okay. You are the owner of the calendar, Leo. Does it make sense that you arrange it, or shall we do it?
You also have access, right?
I do. Yeah. I think.
Nikki should also have access, and maybe soon some others as well. Very cool. So this technical meeting, will this also be about defining the packages or kind of bundling issues together, kind of like this?
I think I think that we should so we should focus on what's first on the roadmap. So the first item in the roadmap is the manual cluster. So we should create the streams for the manual cluster, understand what needs to be installed in there. Beside Falco, we have, from what I understood, from what Antonio made kind of a list while talking. So there are things that we need to install and we need to get going. So we could already get going with those. We don't need to wait for Falco maintainers, in my opinion, of course. So we could define already those if we can get started, or if we just need something else that is blocking us. Find a replacement or a workaround for the S3 endpoint. And there was another blocker. Am I mistaken, Ross? I thought there was another blocker beside the S3.
No, I think it's just S3 that we're blocked on. We were also needing the GitHub token, for Flux, but we have that, so it's just the S3 buckets. And I think the folks working on that are on holiday, so we might get some replies next week till we know about that.
Okay.
But I think a specific meeting on the manual flow and how we can split up those tasks. Yeah, I think that would be great, and we can kind of give that part the focus. And myself and Dibanka can keep working on the automation in the background as we get unblocked.
Okay. So Leo, these are the items that I think we should get going for the manual cluster. Do you feel there are things that we need to do? You mentioned GitHub issues.
No, just reflect basically. I think it usually makes sense to reflect those working packages kind of also in issues.
Okay.
We don't need to do that, but I think generally it helps. So there's like an anchor point of conversations.
Yeah, we can do that. Absolutely. So for any item that we discuss, we create an issue, or we create one general issue with subtasks within the issue, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, both ways are fine. It just depends like how your own style is with this. At the end, I think it's important that for each package, however you want to kind of cut it, it's like some issue. So you have like just like the possibility to comment and to stay up to date and so on.
Yeah.
All right. So after the deployment, after that's working for the MVP, we would need to. So we have Falco running on Equinix. Maybe it's actually also like automated already, which is, I mean, if that's the case, I mean, that would be awesome. I think it's not like a requirement for an MVP as we discussed, but I mean, if we happen to have like the capacity and also like the, I don't know, ambition or whatever to do that, I mean, that would be great. So what is missing to have like an MVP after that? Certainly recording metrics. So the project that we invited, or Nikki, and not sure actually who made the connection open, probably Nikki, about K6, or maybe Parker, some of those tools maybe would be needed also inside of the MVP scope. What do you think?
So once we have Falco up and running in a cluster, and that's, yeah, all the components also then need to be deployed by Flux for networking, Prometheus, Kepler, etc. Then the next step is, well, we need the synthetic workload also deployed. I believe that we discussed that this would be part of what the Falco maintainers deploy, so that anything that is CNCF project specific is all the responsibility of the project maintainers. But that's the long-term automation stream of work. For manual work, we can definitely deploy the synthetic workload ourselves. And then we need to, well, the idea was to use K6 to create the load. That's part of the pipeline. So we did discuss creating a manual, a GitHub Action workflow with manual steps if we want, to begin with, and then automate that later on as well. So there's like the manual versus automated stream also for the pipeline. We discussed that we would need to create enough kernel events and be able to monitor that. And then, that's part of the load testing itself that we could be doing with the help of K6. Like K6 would send the request to the synthetic workload, and the synthetic workload would create the kernel events, and then Falco would pick up on those, etc. So TLDR, the next step after everything is provisioned is to create the GitHub Action workflow, starting with a manual workflow.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a question. So you said there are some networking components and Prometheus that needs to be installed with Flux. Okay, could you? I don't think I got very well this, or maybe got it wrong. But what are the requirements? Are there some components requirement? Like I think Prometheus is needed, and like what else do we need from the networking side to get Falco running?
Yes, there's Cilium, and I believe Ross can expand on that further. I'm looking for where we've tracked this. Ross?
Yes, yeah, we're using Cilium for CNI, and we'll need Prometheus on there as well. I think there is an issue that tracks for say, we'll list the things we wanted to set up with Flux, but we can just install those manually for a start.
Okay, so because I'm trying to maintain a list of the things that we need to install manually. So those would be till now, right? Prometheus, Cilium, Falco, K6, right?
Yes, and Kepler.
And Kepler. So, and then like we can set up, maybe we can have, I don't know, one issue for each of those installation, and then would be fine, right? Or would something like this work? Or am I missing something?
Yes, I think an issue per component would be great. The only thing I was thinking about was we were talking about maybe running 2 worker nodes. So we would have one worker node just for Falco, and then we would have the other worker node for Prometheus and kind of everything else. Whether we want to set that up now, or or we just have everything running on a single worker for now. I think definitely an issue per component would be great, and then we can split that out between the work and parallelize it.
Okay, so we have five components, right? Like I'm not missing anything. Cilium, Prometheus, Kepler, Falco, and K6.
Do we need case? So if we have Kepler, we already have like some metrics, right? But we cannot do like proper testing. But I mean, we have metrics. Would this be enough like for first MVP? So just trying to think, okay, maybe there's like some option to make it even easier, or like not easier, but simpler in a way.
Yeah, I remember one of the problem we discussed with Falco was that we need to generate some kernel events. Otherwise, I mean, we need to generate some noise. Like the cluster need to do something to let Falco be like produce some metrics which are relevant to a close to production scenario. So that's why like either synthetic workload or K6 it's needed. Like we cannot get metrics if Falco is idle. And I think with Cilium, Prometheus, Kepler, and Falco only, like there wouldn't be much activity on CPU memory and so on, and kernel events.
Antonio, in the list that you mentioned before, you did need to add the synthetic workload as well, and I just added it in the design doc as it was missing, but I'm not sure if it was in the issue. Yeah, we need to update the issue as well to add the synthetic workload in K6, because Leo, otherwise, yeah, what Antonio said, without anything running, well, we can get the idle metrics. That's one thing that we can get without having K6 or the synthetic workload running. So maybe we can, I mean, Antonio just said that, but I mean that we could unblock some of the metrics gathering process even without having figured out the load testing part just yet. We can split there.
Yeah, one thing is that maybe what we don't need, so like if the synthetic data generator was the one which we discussed together last time, which I think Melissa proposed, is this Google service platform that one has already some data generator which should work. So we don't need a load tester to call API additionally, because there should be already like a Python script which constantly calls those APIs. So maybe we might not need K6, but a synthetic load generator for sure.
Okay, sounds good. I think it's like it could be like the same story as with the automation part. So that like synthetic workloads or whatever. Actually, I was not on the call. I'm not in detail with this, but this is like sort of like a very bare concept, or basically how we can measure the things, and then later on for like first release, we want to have like a more sophisticated tool like K6 to actually does more workload testing. So if we can, basically everything that we can throw out of the MVP is good. Does not need to be like a full-fledged end-to-end running version.
So to summarize, we can have 3 steps in the component in the applications that we will deploy. First, we will need Cilium, Prometheus, and Kepler as the basis of the basic applications. This is regardless of the CNCF project. Then we have the Falco itself, which manually we will deploy ourselves in our repo, but in the automated flow we will deploy through what the CNCF project maintainers give us, like the manifest they give us. And then we can at this point already gather metrics for idle, and then we can deploy the synthetic workload, etc., for the load testing metrics. William, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Nikki. One just maybe it's a little bit conceptual, but I don't think that the MVP should include the CNCF projects that is being measured. I think that into the MVP, we drop the project that one day is Istio, one day is Falco, or whatever it is, and then we do our work to get that measured. Meaning, if we look at it in this perspective, that means that we forget about Falco, we forget about what they need to provide us, and we just build the platform. Then we contact the maintainers and we get their manifest. We get, if they have manifests that can help us with, synthetic workload generators, if they do have some. But we have our own platform that is built with K6, with Kepler, with all the tools that we believe that needs to be built, and the list of things that Ross put together. but we shouldn't be looking at the MVP as Falco is in the middle of it. That like Falco is a consumer of the MVP, something that we put in the MVP. I don't know if I can explain, if I'm explaining myself correctly. Well, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's an option. Definitely. It would make things probably a lot easier. But yeah, I mean, we should continue, I think, parallelize in the sense like the communication with the Falco team. But
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
maybe
Yes, yes.
not be part of the MVP. Because also, I mean, to actually think about like the interface that we expose for Falco, we first need to have like something, like some product like to work with. And right now we don't have that. We don't have like the MVP, so we cannot show Falco, okay, this is like maybe how we can build the interface. Like this is the manifest, is like all the info, like additional meta information that you need to provide us. So maybe it makes sense, yeah. So like MVP and then like first project deployment would be like a kind of a milestone after that, which includes then Falco. And the milestone after the MVP would focus on, okay, how does projects submit their manifests and specific deployments and so on to us? So basically, how does our interface look like? Maybe that's a good
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, okay, it's good.
All right. We just have 5 minutes and then there's like the regular tech talk. Tech talk. TED talk. No, the tech meeting.
Yeah,
I have
let's take
one more,
some
like just one question, just
Okay.
to anybody about do you think it's like reasonable to finish this kind of up to KubeCon in Paris? So do you think maybe we could have something to show at the conference? So we have a maintainer talk and so on. Just as a goal kind of for us.
I think that if we put that as a milestone and as a target, yes. If we put that we're open and open to the will of others, maybe not. But if we put milestones, we're just human beings and we work with against timelines, right? So I think yes, if we put milestones and dates, I think we can make it happen. It would be actually very nice to make it happen. Ross, what do you think?
Yes, I think so. If we set, depends how we set the scope of the MVP. But I think having something that we can demo and show will be great. I think one of the end results is we want to have the results appearing in DevStat. So maybe it's not the fully formed product, things aren't appearing there, but having a pipeline where we're taking measurements and we can show them. Yeah, I mean, I also like the idea is if we have the dependencies within the project rather than depending on external projects, that gives us a bit more control. So yeah, I mean, we talked a bit in one of the previous meetings about not wanting to have too hard a deadline. But I think we have some time till then, and it's good to have something to aim for because in reality, we do work towards timelines.
Yeah, we have the priority of the manual pipeline. And if we prioritize that, then we can definitely get to a point where we have metrics to show by KubeCon, but not the automated part. Not completely. But definitely we could specify the scope a bit further. I'm also conscious, yeah. The load testing part has not been, we briefly touched on it in the last meeting, but that one is more of a question mark. How easy or hard it will be to load test Falco. I think that's one, yeah, big question mark. Like, I don't know if we will, how much we will get done of that before KubeCon, but we can certainly try. Also conscious that we're volunteer run, so while dates and timelines are good, we also should be conscious of, like, this isn't, yeah, we're all doing a best effort, and in open source projects, this is, we should be conscious of limited time people have, and to not put yeah, pressure on ourselves when we already have high pressure daily work. Yeah, just wanted to point that out. We have 1 minute to go until the next meeting, so let's take some time and see you on the other side.